Hello, this is Angelia, and you are listening to or watching the podcast Why You Do What You Do. The podcast that talks about psychology and human development to help you understand why you do what you do. And last time we left off talking about heredity, environment, and maturation. So we're going to jump back in on that. And we're going to start with culture. Everyone comes from a culture. You have a culture in different countries, even. You have different cultures. Like we have a northern, a southern, a western, So the culture that you come from influences your development. Our culture is different from people in South America. Their culture is different from someone in Britain. So the culture that you come up in also affects your development. We need to look at influences that affect many or most people at a certain age or a certain time in history. And that's in order to study development. Because, again, there are some things that are across the board. I've heard a lot about archetypes, certain things, that people think about when they see a thing but even those differ sometimes from country to country. So, that will influence your development and your outlook on the world. I know I've had friends and people I've known from different cultures, and their belief system is not like mine. And their reactions to certain things are not like mine. And sometimes their beliefs to me are very strange, whereas they feel the same way about mine. So we're all different, but there are things across the board that we have in common. Like I say, we're all human beings on this earth. We're all in the same boat. And also at those that affect only certain individuals. So again, your own unique experience, everything that you experience affects your development. So no matter if it was a good experience or a bad experience, your brain has to figure out what to do with that. Finally, we need to look at how timing can affect the impact of certain influences. And some people say timing is everything. So the time you grew up in even will affect you. People that grew up in the Depression are notoriously, penny pinchers, and their children maybe were not so happy about that. And people who grew up in the 50s are kind of notoriously, a little more free and a little more nostalgic, and people who grew up like I did in the 70s, were a little more free and open about things. So even the time you grew up in is going to influence your development. Major contextual influences, and that's in the context of your development. Human beings are social beings, and even if you're antisocial, you're still a social being. At some point, you liked being around other people, and usually people become antisocial because other people were not so good to them and made them feel like they wanted to be antisocial. Right from the start, they develop within a social and historical context. So from the day you're born, you're in a certain group of people, and you're in a certain point in time. And so these things are going to affect how you develop as a person, whether you had a good family or a bad family, or whether it was a rough time in history or an easy time in history, is going to affect how you develop. A child born in the United States today is likely to have a very different experience from a child in colonial America. And, that's just common sense there. We are doing a lot better now and have a lot more going on now than old George Washington and them guys did. And also from a child born in Morocco or Greenland or Afghanistan, because we have a different life here. We're a more affluent country than Morocco or, Afghanistan. And Greenland's kind of just a very sparse country. So, of course, we would have a different way of living than they would. And so that would affect how you're developing as well. For an infant, the immediate context normally is the family. Like I said, from day one, you start out in this family, and they are the first influences on your life. But the family, in turn, is subject to the wider and ever-changing influences of the neighborhood. Again, if you have a good neighborhood or a bad neighborhood, that's going to affect your development, how you look on things, your community, and society as a whole, and wherever it is that you're living. A family. Families take diverse forms in different times and places. So we start out with a biological set of parents. One of them might not be involved, one of them might be involved. Every family's different. Then you move out into the greater family. Like I said, sisters, brothers, grandparents, aunts, uncles, or whatever. Or if you don't stay in your biological family, such as children who are given up for adoption, you have a bunch of other kids and adults, that you're around with. And then you might be adopted out into another family. Or, if a parent is not capable of taking care of a child, the grandparents may take on that role and take care of the children. I know that happens a lot. So, maybe aunts, uncles, cousins, big brothers and sisters sometimes will step in if there's, something that keeps the parents from raising these children. So anyone who does a parent's job is basically a parent, even if that's not your technical label. But families can take, all shapes and sizes. I know down in the country, my great aunt and uncle were helping to raise a couple kids that were helping them out on the farm because their families were poor. And so they were, paying these kids to help them out on the farm. And my husband used to actually work on a farm when he was a teenager, where he was helping this guy out. So a family can look like many different things. Their attributes have changed greatly during the past 150 years or so. Because like I said, 150 years ago, that was just it. Parents taking care of the kids, raising the kids. You had an immediate family, you had an extended family. That was pretty much the deal. You didn't have the societal problems that we have nowadays with our affluence, that make it so that, grandparents or aunts or uncles or whoever have to step in and help raise a child. Because, the only reason back then, 150 years ago, they might have had to do that is if a parent died or both parents, were dead for some reason. And then somebody might have to step in. So, that also affects your development, because that your mother is the person you hear when you're in the womb. And if that relationship is not there, that is going to affect you. But with proper care and love, you can feel like your parents are your grandparents or your aunt or uncle, whoever steps in for you, because that's what children need. It doesn't matter if you don't have the biological connection to your caregiver. It matters that your caregiver loves you, your caregiver is thinking about you, they're working for your highest good, and they're taking care of you. That's what matters. The nuclear family is a two-generational kinship, economic, and household unit consisting of one or two parents and their biological, adopted, or stepchildren. And I'm sure some of the older people understand the nuclear family reference, because that's what it was called, like in the 50s and 60s. During the nuclear age, everybody was worried about stuff, but, people don't usually call it that anymore. But that's the traditional family of the time. Historically, the two-parent nuclear family has been the dominant family unit in the United States and other Western societies. So in the West, that's the predominant, family is the mom and dad, kids, and, and that has to do also because of, the traditional values that, were brought into this country by the settlers who came in. The Pilgrims were a religious group who was being persecuted, and so they came here. And so that has come, through the ages to the point where, people are trying to be good people, have these nuclear families, and it didn't always work out. But, that was the goal, is to get married, have your kids, have a nice house, with your picket fence and the roses and all that fun stuff. That the American dream. Parents and children typically worked side by side on the family farm. And again, a lot of people prior to the turn of the century, prior to the Industrial Revolution, the family farm was the thing, because that's how you fed yourself. That's how you would have a little extra money or be able to barter. So that was a big thing. And there, unfortunately, were children. My grandparents knew some people who did not get to go to school or did not get to finish school because they had to help out on the family farm. Large families provided many hands to share the work. And that's, like I said, children were expected to work. If you was on the farm, you had to work. And children's activities and education revolved around the priorities of agricultural production. So, there wasn't the formal education like there is now to make a well-rounded person. The education then was about, raising food, raising animals, and, probably home crafts so that you could have a nice home and feed yourself. By the mid-20th century, most U.S. families had moved off the farm, and that's true. People stopped having the family farm, or they kept the family farm and rented it out. That's what happened in my family. And, other people might be taking care of that. You might be getting royalties. You might have a cousin that lives on the farm or whatever. But most people do live in the suburbs now. We have they used to call it the urban sprawl, where people lived in the big city and then you had the outline. Now we also have the suburban. We have like belts now. We have the urban, the suburban, the rural. So, the family farm has kind of gone away. There are still, few, and there needs to be a few so that we can eat. Or, that's going to be a problem, because most people in the city don't have space to grow their own food or raise their own animals. You can't raise chickens on a balcony. Families were smaller. Men were away at work for much of the day, and children spent much of their time in school. So the families changed from land centralized to employment centralized. The dad went to work. In the nuclear family, the 50s and 60s, mom stayed at home and raised the kids. And the kids had to go to school for 6 hours a day so that they could learn, what they needed to succeed in the working world. During the past 50 years, change has accelerated. And, I can tell you that, from being just alive for 55 years. I mean, our televisions were black and white. We had a phone that had a wire running out to the side of the house. There was no such thing as a cell phone. Our radios were these little transistor jobbies. If someone had a stereo, that was amazing, and they were big, monstery things in a cabinet that sat in a room. So things have changed a lot just since I've been around. Today, both parents are likely to work outside the home, and that's just an unfortunate reality. because the cost of living has moved up a lot faster than, the, what do you call it? Well, anyway, the pay raises and things that people have got. So, you have to make, I read somewhere on the computer is talking about a family making less than 42,000 basically lives in poverty because of the cost of living. And we're kind of at that line, but you know, it's necessary to bring the money into the house because you can't make a living like you could. I mean, I look at how my grandparents bought a house for $1,600. $1,600. Can you imagine that? What could you buy now for $1,600? You couldn't buy a car. You couldn't buy a house. So, the cost of living has just skyrocketed to where both parents have to work. And that is going to cause some problems for the kids. A child is likely to receive a considerable amount of care from relatives or non-relatives because a lot of people are lucky enough the grandparents can babysit. And if not, you might have to hire a babysitter. And I remember when my mom was single and we had some babysitters and we had some doozies, I'll tell you what. But she went through several babysitters before a solution was found with the grandparents. Because my grandmother didn't drive for the longest time. So she couldn't come and go. And the other grandmother was still raising other kids of her own. So that wasn't working at that point in time. And later on it worked out. But at that point in time, it didn't. If a couple are divorced, their children may live with one or the other parent or may move back and forth between their homes. And my parents were divorced for a space of time, and we lived with my mother. And my father had started another family, and we would go sometimes, but there were problems there with not getting along, and that boiled back to the two moms basically were competing, for the same man, and so we were being told things about them, they were being told things about us, and of course, that's not a good situation. And that is going to affect your development, because if, you feel like you're being pulled between two parents, that causes turmoil inside of you. And you're not sure what to do with that, because of course you're a child, so there's really nothing you can. You are being forced into that situation, and that is going to affect you. The household may include a step-parent and step-siblings, or a parent's live-in partner. And like I said, we had a half-sister and a step-sister, and we were young. So, like I said, they're fighting, bickering. I remember going to their house, and my stepsister wouldn't share with me. She wouldn't let me play anything with her, really, because she was very, I guess, jealous of us, because her father hadn't been in the picture, and my father became a father to her. And I said a mean thing to her one time when she called him dad. I was like, you can't call him dad because he's not your dad, And that was just, being a kid, because that's how kids are. Kids can be mean, and again, they just might see things truthfully the way they are. But that's how a child does. They'll go ahead, they're very impulsive, and they'll just say stuff like that. So, we did not get along, like I said, because we were conditioned that way. It's like, they're like this, and they were being told, no, they're like this. And so, of course, there wasn't getting along. And the stepmother treated her children differently than we were treated. Like, we went outside to play on a hot day. Her children were given popsicles. We were not. And father got home, and we complained about being hot and only getting water. And her kids got to have popsicles, and she was like, well, I didn't know if their mom allows sweets or not, and I don't want to get yelled at for it. So, this is the kind of dynamic that goes on when you have step families sometimes. Sometimes not. Sometimes they get along great. I have a nephew, and, the wife and it was just a girlfriend, both have kids by him, and they let their kids hang out and do things together. So, you never know when you start splitting families and making different families if the kids are going to get along or not. And of course, if they don't, then that's also going to affect things. There are increasing numbers of single and childless adults, and that's something that's happening here with the millennials now. That a lot of them are choosing to stay single and choosing not to have children. I think that's sad. I don't think that getting married and having children is a goal anymore, because people are seeing a lot of divorce. That's like I heard a relative of mine say, why bother getting married? 50% of them end up in divorce anyway, which is everybody I know that got married got divorced. And that's sad, because marriage can be a good thing. And the major problems in marriage is communication. When you stop communicating, that is a problem. And if you're having problems in your marriage, you should go get counseling, get couples counseling, work this stuff out. Because a lot of the times people just get divorced because they stop being able to relate to each other. When you're dating, you're so in love and it's so marvelous. And of course you act different when you're dating than you do, when you get married. When you get married, then, they're going to have to hear you go to the bathroom or see you go in the bathroom. They have to go in there for some reason. They're going to learn that you, sneeze, belch, or fart, and poop, and, and y'all might not agree on everything. So resentment can build up about these things. And you might feel like you need to change them. They may feel like they need to change you. But really, you just need to change the way that you're dealing with each other. So if you're having that problem, you should go talk to someone and get that hashed out, because usually it can be hashed out. Usually you just have to be willing to hash it out, Excuse me. Okay, unmarried parents. I know a couple who lived together for, 50 years or so, never did get married. They felt like that piece of paper was not important to them. And like they said, everybody getting married gets divorced anyway. So to them, by keeping it more of a informal bond, they were, able to keep the relationship going, because they felt like marriage put too much stress on the relationship. And, that's a way some people deal with that. And gay and lesbian households, that's increasing. That was not something that was even talked about during the nuclear family days. But again, people are growing and maturing in society and realizing that, there are people like this, and they should not be cut out of, love. And, a lot of people think that, if you're gay or bi or whatever, that you're a sex maniac and all you're going to do is screw anyone you can. And, that's not true. Gay people fall in love and want to be loved and want to be married and have families too. Now, are there some like that? Yeah, there's some straight people like that. The most recent term for them would be dogs out there screwing everything they can. So, keep those stereotypes, out of your mind, because they can be spread on any group of people. In many societies, such as those of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and among families in the United States that originated from those countries, the extended family, a multi-generational kinship network of grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, and more distant relatives, is the traditional pattern of societal organization. Because they do get together more, they're more family oriented, and when I was younger, our family was kind of like that. When the grandmas were all alive, we'd all get together and have family gatherings and stuff. And there might be, a house full of people spilling out into the yards, but not so much anymore. And that is a good thing, because then you have a group that you are like, but also, you're an individual, but you belong to the group, and they have evolved learning that this keeps them safer, that this gives them a, base in life they can always fall back on. Many or most people live in extended family households where they have daily contact with kin. Um, I went to school with kids like that, living with grandma, auntie lives with them, cousin comes and stays with them half the year or whatever. And that's the norm for them, for the nuclear family of, the Anglo-Saxon descent. That might be something they wouldn't want. They wouldn't want the grandparents living with them. They wouldn't want cousin to come over here half a year or whatever. So, again, back to the everything is different. It's what you grow up with, what you learn. Social rules tend to be flexible. Adults often share breadwinning, and children are given responsibility for younger brothers and sisters. So, if grandma or auntie's living in the house, they're probably also working and bringing money into the house. I had some Asian friends who, owned a restaurant, and then, they decided they didn't like America so much and actually went back to China. But the deal was, he was telling me that they lived in a house and there were 20 people living in this house. And all the adults were, bringing in money, and it went into one pot. And it was doled out to all the family and all the kids. This one needed clothes, they got this one clothes. This one needed a phone, they got this one a phone. And older kids were expected to babysit and help with the younger kids. Now, there's a couple schools of thought on that. One says that's not good, that they should be allowed to be children. And another school of thought on that says it is good because that prepares them for taking care of their own children. So, just depends on how you look at that one. But again, that will affect your development. Okay, today the extended family household is becoming less typical in developing countries. And that is due to industrialization and migration to urban centers. So, as that changes, more people have to move into cities, have to get jobs. Our city, the population in that, we were doing a study for applying for grants for the charity. The population in that decade had grown 6 times. And that was from the surrounding counties. We have basically 3 major cities in our state. And the surrounding counties, people were moving out because they wanted the jobs that were in the city. So our city grew 6 times the population, and boy, it shows. When I was a kid, there's a road that's a secondary road, but it was one of the biggest roads in its day in the 70s when I was growing up. You might go down that road, and the whole time you're going down that road, you might see 4 or 5 cars. Now, there's bumper-to-bumper traffic on that road that only moves when the stoplights change. So, this also will affect you, how many people that you're around. And as people have moved into the city, there gets to be more and more people around. So this can lead to you either being used to more people and okay with more people, or having a problem, being a little antisocial. Groups that have achieved upward mobility. And again, these groups, they called them yuppies in the 80s. But that's what they want. They want the American dream. They want to come and stop, having to be farmers or sustenance living. They want to have the jobs. They want to have the cars, the house, the American dream. So, this is going to affect you. Your parents' attitudes towards life is going to affect you. At the same time, with the aging of the population, multi-generational family bonds are becoming increasingly important in Western societies. And that's because if mom and dad's both out there working, grandparents now are the babysitters. And, in a lot of countries, that's how this works, A lot of the northern countries, mom and dad are out doing the thing, and the grandparents are now in the home. In the former times, they would all live in the house together. I've read a lot of historical things where, they had grandparents and uncles and aunts and cousins living in this one home. They had like a big common room, and then there were two wings, where the different family members lived. So, again, that's going to affect your development, who you're living with, and how you come up. So that's all for today. And hopefully that might have shed a little light on why you do what you do. Until next time.